with that, I think we're going to start off here. Get ourselves on time. It's 10:02. We have 3 presentations today, and then 3 presentations tomorrow, both 10 to 12. And some good topics this year, I think, are really based on what's going on, what the current status of agriculture is in regards to fertilizer and weed control, issues with lack of glyphosate products and pest control, maybe, losing a product here. So I think the next, couple of days, next 4 hours are really good topics to get us thinking about the new year and where do we go from here. So with that, I'm gonna get us going here with our first presentation, and that's Elson Shields. So Elson, as you know, is our resident field crop entomologist at Cornell, and he's done some great work. It seems like every year he finds something different to control with nematodes, but he's going to talk about a couple of topics with us. The first being some of the possible loss of neonicotinoids and some work he's been doing looking at seed corn maggot in corn, and also again some additional nematode work that he's doing for corn rootworm. So 2 important corn pests for us that we've got to learn to control and get around some of these new possible regulations. So Elson, I see you there. Are you ready to go?
Yes, I'm ready to go. I need you to start my video.
Okay. It says all panelists. We're trying here. Elson, go to your green button at the bottom and share your screen again. Try it again.
Okay. Let's see.
Bottom green button there.
Sure.
There you go.
Okay.
You just need to get in. I see the slides. Just need to get in presentation mode.
Okay, are we good?
It's.
You see presentation, see the title?
I can, but it's a dual slide. So I can see your next slide. You need to get.
Go up to the top, Elson, to the display settings.
Okay, so there's full screen there, and here is presentation, and you see the full presentation?
We're
Up at
still
the
seeing
top of your
both.
screen, there's show taskbar, display settings, and slideshow. Click on that down arrow for display settings. That should change that for you.
All right. Somehow I've completely screwed it up. Okay, so at the top of the screen, the green arrow.
Well, I don't see it. It's a downward arrow on display settings. You could have, I think you could have done it from your screen where you were. You just want to change the view.
Well, let me cancel stop share. You think we know how to do all this because we've done this so many times, huh? Okay, so we're going to share screen again.
Okay, we can see.
And I'm sharing now, and I go full screen. Am I now full screen? And presentation mode?
No, you want slideshow. There you go.
You got it. You got it now.
Okay, I got it now.
You got full screen now. Yep, you look good. Elson, you're a little light. So you can speak a little louder. I can. You're light. I can't hear you very well.
I can get closer to the microphone.
Okay, because you're soft. Can't hear you.
Well, I've got my microphone full volume, so.
Okay. Turn mine up.
anyway.
There we go. You're good.
Oh, it's on your end. Okay.
It's my end.
So we fooled our ignorance, and now we're going to talk on seed corn maggot and biological control of corn rootworm. So here we go. So we've ignored seed corn maggot for a few years because we've had excellent control with neonics. And now it has become a topic outside of field crops to where people think neonic or seed corn maggot's not that much of an issue. Those of us in the field on a regular basis see breakthroughs. And those of us that are over 50 actually were in the era before neonics, and we have a little different idea of to the severity of seed corn maggot. Now, there was an attempt in the early 90s for cover crops, and this picture, it comes from those eras, and you can see a lot of missing stand from seed corn maggot. This was when we were back at the planter box treatments and no seed treatment for neonics. And a lot of, I walked dozens of fields along with other people. And basically cover crops kind of came to a halt because of stand problems from seed corn maggot. So I thought I would do some research and look at this again. And what we're going to talk about today is, are insecticide seed treatments really needed? There's a lot of people that claim that like I said, outside, that they're not really needed. It's a waste of money. Seed corn maggot's not that big an issue. And so we're going to look in continuous corn, 7 years continuous corn, and corn following cover crops. And then we're going to look at some data by Brian Nault to show the efficacy of the alternatives. So here's my design. They were basically single row plots using a 4-row corn planter. And so we had single rows of a non-BT without seed treatment, the same variety with seed treatment, BT rootworm without seed treatment, BT rootworm with seed treatment. And the purpose of the trial was also to see if we had effectiveness with our biocontrolled nematodes. And as I said before, we had two agricultural situations where we had continuous corn and we had corn following a cover crop. It was red clover. So let's look at the continuous corn design. Once again, we had single rows for each treatment. We had 6 weekly planting dates where we made a single planter pass with 4 replications. And so right side by side, we would have no insecticide, insecticide, no insecticide, insecticide. Okay, so what are the results? Well, let's assume our target stand was 32,000 plants to the acre. There's a lot of debate among agribusiness professionals in field crops as to exactly where we're going to start to see yield loss with stand loss. Some people are adamant that we start seeing it at 10%. 10% stand loss. We're going to see. Hang on a minute, we got too much technology going here. 10% stand loss, some people believe that's where we start seeing yield loss. Many people believe that we start seeing measurable yield loss at about 14, 15% stand loss, and everybody agrees 20% stand loss will see yield. So under continuous corn, in the 10% or greater, we've had 30% of the planting pairs showing yield loss from seed corn maggot. At the 15% level, 1 out of 3 of the planting pairs had stand loss, and at 20%, 1/4 of the planting date by variety had yield loss. So what is this in terms of dollars? Well, I queried the people who know across the regions, and they said a 20-ton yield of silage is typical, and the value was $40 a ton. So if we had a 1% yield loss, and we all know we can never measure that, we're talking about an $8 loss, 0.2 of a ton. 5% yield loss, we're looking at $40 or a ton. The cost of seed corn maggot treatment is about $5 an acre. So if you're risking 1 out of every 4 of your fields to have yield loss and it costs you $5, is it any wonder that we treat all of our seed? So remember these values, 38% to 25% in 7-year continuous corn. But we also looked at the cover crops, corn following cover crops plus manure, which is typical of a lot of our dairy applications. The difference is we had a little more room, so we used the same single row plots, but we made two planter passes. So we had 6 weekly planting dates, 4 reps, 2 planter passes, and the same treatments. Not surprising, we found that the losses from seed corn maggot increased. So if you use the 10% threshold, every other planting pair had significant stand loss or stand loss. If we use the 15% threshold, almost 40% of our planting pairs had stand loss. And if we use the 20% threshold, almost 30%. So this is much higher than one famous Cornell report has reported from other states. This is typical of what I saw early in my career when I walked all these fields. And I believe that this is a pretty realistic level of seed corn maggot. We all know of growers who decide not to use seed treatments, and sometimes the failures are pretty significant. So in summary, continuous corn, 38 to 25% stand loss from seed corn maggot without an insecticide. Corn after cover crop plus manure, we're looking 54% to 29% stand loss from seed corn maggot. So what do we do if we lose neonic seed treatments? There's a lot of movement to try and ban these across the country in our legislature, et cetera. So what do we do as field crop farmers? Well, option 1, do nothing, suffer losses, 25 to 54% of the field. The diamides are touted as the replacement seed treatment. They're currently 3 times the cost of the neonics. Liquid insecticide with a pop-up fertilizer at planting is another possibility, and in-furrow soil insecticides. Brian, here's some data from Brian Nald. He's our vegetable entomologist and works every year with seed corn maggot. So here are the dianamides. You can see his untreated check. This is, of course, in snap beans, but it doesn't matter anyway. So in his untreated check, 43% of the plants showed damage from seed corn maggot. In his best treatment with diamides, he got only 50% control. Look at this, 18%, 21% compared to our neonics, which he only had 5% damage. So we're looking with neonics, 88% control. With the diamides, we're looking at 50% control. Capture as a liquid, as we often put in our pop-up fertilizer, we had similar results. In this particular study, he had 20% of the plants damaged with the untreated controls, and he got a 50% reduction in damage. Some of my colleagues around the country and in New York are suggesting that we can do risk assessment, we can capture flies, we can plant when we don't see any seed corn maggot flies around. And I have some real questions about the strategy because we have an extremely wide winter of vulnerability with corn. Depending upon when we plant, we're between 7 days and 30 days before emergence. In addition, there's no rescue treatment. So what if you planted your corn without flies around and the next week we suddenly had an invasion of flies? Well, we cannot rescue them. So with that, if we've got any questions, the burning questions, we can address those, or we'll have some time after that. So are there any questions, Nancy?
Not at this point.
Okay. Let's go on to biological control of rootworm. Now, you all know that I've been working on this for a while. It started up with snout beetle in the North Country, and we've moved on to corn rootworm. These biocontrol nematodes are naturally occurring. In fact, the ones we use in New York State, we first isolated in New York State. And so they're naturally occurring in the soil. They're just not as frequent as when we apply them under the agricultural setting. They're obligate parasites. They're naturally occurring in soil. They only feed on insects, and they don't attack our plants in any manner. So here's our impact on corn rootworm. These roots actually came out from Aurora. So the plants on your left are a failing BT event. You can see that 7 years of continuous corn, you can see corn rootworm has really reamed these plants. And this is actually one of the leading single events. The same failing event plus nematodes applied 7 years before a single time gives us perfectly clean roots. So you've all seen this before, and I want to update you a little bit. So just to drive this home, a single application provides pest insect control for multiple growing seasons. We followed these for 10 years across 75 fields, and then once they're established, they're established. And here's kind of the graph of out of the corn plots. They were put on in 2014. And here in 2020, you can see that the levels of nematodes are cycling between 30 and 50% of the soil samples being positive for biocontrol nematodes. They change based on the amount of rootworms that are out there. But here, 7 years later, they're still there. Single application. We've also shown they persist across corn rotations. So here's one example that where they were put on in 2008 and 2013, where they're alfalfa to corn and back to alfalfa. So they're resistant to rotation. So we've demonstrated efficacy on corn rootworm in New York and nationally, on wireworms, which is often a problem when we rotate from alfalfa grass mixtures. We've demonstrated with all the root weevils for the small fruit people, including snout beetle, and multi-year native white grubs. So oftentimes in field crops, when we rotate from alfalfa with grass, we seem to have problems with some of our native white grubs and wireworms. And so if we had applied nematodes for corn rootworm, we're also going to reduce any impact with those. I want to zero in a little bit on the data that happened at Aurora. This was initiated in 2014. We had non-BT rootworm corn, single trait and dual trait. And some of this data I've shown you over the years. And I'll show you again because that study is now completed. Before we show you the data, the thing to remember is that if we get between 1/2 and 1 node damage, that's where economic loss starts to occur. The variation is based on the growing season that we have. 2 nodes and 3 nodes are certainly where we start getting yield loss. So I'll show you this one data slide, and I run through it because you've seen it before. In 2016, we had almost 2 nodes gone. Nematodes reduced that to 0.2. So you saw an 89% reduction. 17, we had a much lighter. 2018, we were much lighter, so we didn't get any data. 2019, we were just barely economic. You saw a 50% reduction. Here in very dry soil, we still saw a reduction, but it showed that we have a potential problem with if it gets very dry, the nematodes can't search for their prey. And in 2020, we saw 86% reduction. So this is from a single application. The same thing is true with traded corn, where we actually were developing resistance. You see that With no EPNs, we got great control with the trait. It started breaking down in 2018, 2019, 2020. So this is a developing resistance in my actual plots to 3435 or Herculex. And you can see that nematodes provided suppression, subeconomic suppression. Well, let's zero in on a single slide about this drought question. As you can see, within our emergence cages, we had 2 nodes of damage, which is economic. We had 1.6, which is still economic, where our nematodes are. This raised the question as perhaps this whole system will break down if we are very dry in the month of June. And in fact, this is a joint study in Pennsylvania. And you see the similar thing where in 2020, he was very, very dry in the research farm in Pennsylvania. In fact, it was so dry, the BTs didn't even work. So this is the real question mark if we get really dry. Now, in this case, the corn was looking pretty tough anyway, and there wasn't much to harvest. So we feel comfortable in saying that if you apply biocontrol nematodes once, you'll get a 50 to 90% reduction. Our data shows 2 to 6 years. Dry soil conditions might be an issue, and they're completely compatible with our BT rootworm technology. So where do they fit in New York corn production? Are they a standalone? In New York rotated corn, which I've had 35 years experience now, I feel comfortable with saying that biocontrol nematodes offer an alternative to BT rootworm technology in rotated corn. Rotation and New York conditions keep the rootworm population down. In New York continuous corn, we must use biocontrol nematodes with other things like BTs. The failures that we're seeing in our BTs in New York are all in continuous cornfields. So biocontrol nematodes will help us where the BT traits are failing, but in this case, you don't dare use them by themselves. So how do we apply these? Very easy. Here's one of our farmers in Western New York in 2020. And with applying 200 acres, and you just take your sprayer and remove all the screens and filters. You use a fertilizer stream nozzle. Application rate is 50 gallons to the acre. You apply it late in the day. And this method has been used to inoculate about 30,000 acres and growing in New York. So we understand this system pretty well. And the idea of the fertilizer stream nozzle is to get a concentrated stream down onto the soil surface so the nematodes can get in. We also have what we now have called the Hunter method. Mike Hunter has worked on me for years to convince that we can apply nematodes in liquid dairy manure. And in fact, if you can pour them in the tanker and get them on the field in less than 30 minutes, you in fact can use a pass of liquid manure to inoculate your fields with nematodes. I mean, the dairy manure provides a UV block, so you can do it any time of the day, lots of water, but the key is they can only be in the tank 30 minutes or less. So time to full activity. In our non-irrigated systems in New York, full activity is in year 2. We only get about 30 to 50% activity in year 1. And this is the trait of them being persistent. And also we're putting them down in streams, and therefore it takes a while to fill in. So if you decide to use biocontrol nematodes and apply them, you want to help them out in year 1, their full activity in year 2. In an irrigation application where we get better coverage, we actually get much higher activity in year 1. So we currently have more than 30,000 acres that have been inoculated in the North Country against snout beetle. Farmers are switching to non-BT rootworm corn during the corn rotation because of inoculating. There's been about 1,000 acres inoculated for rootworms alone, many of them located in Western New York. What does it cost? $60 an acre plus, shipping cost and application cost. A one-time cost. We got tired of looking at persistence after 10 years under New York conditions, so we think it's a one-time cost period. So this is pretty cool. I've been working on it for a number of years, and there has caught the attention of other places across the Corn Belt. 2022 shows that there is ongoing research in 12 states, 12 across the country. My colleagues, I've been helping them to try it out. There have been commercial sized applications in 3 states. New research is going in Ontario and Quebec to the north of us, where they're having corn rootworm. And we're seeing some organic farm applications in 4 Canadian provinces. And this gives you an idea. The first challenge is, will the nematodes persist? And this gives you an idea of the geographic distribution of these persistent studies. And so I'll just show you a couple. Pick your environment. Where do you want to look at to see? We'll zoom over to Michigan. One would think Michigan's pretty much like New York. And in fact, 1,000 days after the initial application, you can see in corn, nematodes are persisting just fine. If you pick a more severe environment, New Mexico, much of the agriculture in New Mexico is in valleys where there's water. And as one might expect, it's very much hotter there than New York. And in fact, we applied to a center pivot that's in a dairy operation. This particular center pivot has had BT failures. We applied through the center pivot. This was an interesting experience, but basically nematodes were in a liquid, they were injected, and the irrigation was run at 100%, which is a 1/4 inch of water, so that's 6,000 gallons to the acre. And as you can see here, 880 days later, so this is 3 growing seasons, we are still persisting at 35 to 40% of the soil samples being positive. So the single application in 2019, 2020, the fall of 2021, it's actually early November data, shows excellent persistence. In this particular case, the farmer expects 38 to 40 tons of silage. His BT failed in 2018. It was down to 25,000 or 25 tons. He lost $62,000 with his failure of his BT. 2019, we applied, he had used the same failing BT. He put on liquid insecticide to help out the nematodes, plus the nematodes, and he got back up to 38 tons. In 2020 and 2021, all he had was the biocontrol nematodes and his failed BT, and he's back at 38 tons to the acre. So where does it fit in New York corn or in US corn production? Standalone is not an option. It has to be used. The pressure of rootworm is so much higher. So the recommendation is to deploy nematodes with your BTs. It increases the durability of your BTs, and we see about a 50% reduction in adult emergence. So going forward, it's even increasing. There's efficacy testing now in 20 and 21 in Northeast Iowa, Northwest Illinois, Southwest Wisconsin, Western Ontario, Canada, all areas where they're having BT failures. One of the major companies is putting $1 million into testing farm scale nematodes on Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, and Nebraska, right in the middle of the Corn Belt. Those nematodes will be applied this coming spring. And there are farmers that have decided not to wait for the academics, and there were 950 acres applied in Southeast New Mexico. Western Nebraska is 350 acres, Northwest Texas, and Illinois. Where are they available? Mary DeBeer in Mora, New York, has been providing these persistent nematodes for Northern New York farmers for about 7 years now. So that's one source. There's a second startup, Persistent Biocontrol, that is taking a more national focus, particularly in the Corn Belt for these persistent nematodes. And then we can supply out of my lab, you know, some nematodes if the commercial outlets are not available. So with that, I'll answer any questions. And if not, let's see, we can stop sharing the screen. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, Elson, we do have one question in there. The nematodes can live through the pump, question mark. What PSI is the water pumped at through that pivot?
The pivots are very low pressure, actually. They're only running at about 14, 15 PSI. When we apply them through a sprayer, we tell the applicator, you know, 40 PSI is we know they'll survive 40 PSI through our common pesticide sprayer.
All right, I don't see any more questions. Elson, interesting as usual. This seems like the nematodes, you know, biologicals in general are kind of blowing up, and this seems like this one is going to continue on. Real interested to see some of these studies out of the Midwest on this on the Corn Belt and see how they stand up. You know, obviously there's a lot more BT pressure out there for resistance than maybe we're seeing here in the Northeast, but we have it in Northeast too. It's slowly making its way up in here.
Yeah, Mike, there's a couple of questions that just came in. I don't know if
Okay.
you want to take a minute now. There's one, if you guys could enter those into the Q&A box, it's just easier when it comes to DEC stuff. Can they be applied to a drag line?
The problem with the drag line is how long is the manure in the drag line from the point of application, number one, because lack of oxygen kills nematodes. And so that's the 30-minute window. The second is I would not, the farmer would be on their own about the calibration, you know, about how many nematodes you put in at the point of injection in order to get good distribution. We have absolutely no data on that.
Okay. Elson, are they surviving fall application?
Fall applications are fine. We like to see them go on when soil temperatures are at least 50 degrees. And so we kind of have a cutoff of the end of September. But, you know, some of our farmers are actually applying to the alfalfa in late August that they're going to put into corn the following year. So you can apply them on alfalfa and then kill it out and turn it over, and then they're there for corn the following year.
Okay. Elson, you got a number for the percent of BTs that are failing here in New York?
I don't have a number, but virtually all of them are on where people grow continuous corn. Now, there are some dairies that are starting to have problems, but I don't have a real number on it.
Okay. Well, there's a couple more, Elson. I don't know if you can spend some time. I know some people wanted some more numbers for Mary and such in that Q&A box. If you be willing to type some of those answers in for them. Yeah,
I can. And are you know, this session is recorded, or they can probably pick it off, but I can type in those phone numbers for Mary.
Yeah, if you could just, there's a couple questions. If you can just answer those, that would be fantastic. And we're going to continue moving on. Everything is being recorded today, folks. So you will get a link to this, you know, further down the road. Once we get everything wrapped up, you will receive a link to today and tomorrow as a participant. So just to put that out there. All right, Elson, thank you very much. Always interesting, buddy. Appreciate it.
All righty.
All right, we're going to keep on moving here, and it looks like we're going to continue on with the biological type of presentation. And Connor Sible, I haven't met Connor. We talked a lot on the phone, but he is a PhD student out of University of Illinois, and many of you probably know his major advisor. That's Dr. Fred Bilo. I've heard Fred when he was out here speaking at a New York Corn and Soybean Growers Association summer tour, and I've heard him at Commodity Classic. And I think Connor makes him look good. I think Connor does all the research he's doing on these biologicals. I think Fred's talking about. So it's great to have the person who's really involved in the research and engrossed in it as a PhD project. And so Connor, I know you've been doing this for a couple of years, and I'm going to let you take it away here to tell us a little bit about the work you're doing with biologicals in corn.
Sounds good. Happy to be here and to give Dr. Beal full credit. While we do a lot of the manual labor, he does let us design and implement our own research questions. So without that support from him, a lot of this wouldn't be possible. I think you can see my screen okay. And then I didn't know if it's possible to get my video as a visual person to go through. Otherwise, we'll just go through just the voice.
I'm not sure. Give it a try.
Yeah, it says it's blocked by host. That's fine. We can move on in the interest of time.
Okay.
And I'll just try and get all my visuals throughout in the speaking. So here from Illinois. So only been out to New York once, and unfortunately it was straight to the big city. I know most of you are much further north of there. But we're going to talk about biologicals because regardless of where you are in agriculture, biologicals are really exploding on the market, right? Probably a new product comes to you every single day, and it's got all the claims in the world, right? It's going to improve your yields. You're going to be able to reduce your fertilizer. It's going to improve your soil health. It does everything, right? A lot of marketing behind it. Maybe at the end of the season, if you have some left, you can put it in your shampoo bottle and make your hair grow back, right? Sometimes the claims just seem too ridiculous. So today what we're going to do is kind of go through the biologicals. What are they? And how are they designed to work? At the very skeletal structure, let's remove all the marketing and say, this is what is in that product. And here is how it works in the field. So that then you can decide, one, do you even need that product? Is it the right fit for your system? And then two, what we like to do with an approach is what goal do you wish to achieve on your farm? Why do you want to use a biological in your system? And then understanding how they work, go pick the right one. Right? Don't force a specific product into your system. Find out what product is going to meet your needs. But to do that, when we go through biologicals, I always start with the base management. And I have a question. Are row crops currently managed adequately? And if I was to rephrase this, are we achieving the full yield potential of our crops? And today we're talking about corn. And so my question, I am at the university, you got to have questions, it's like class, right? What is the world record corn yield and what is the corn yield gap? Now, you're all off the hook today because we're virtual. If we were there in person, I'd pick somebody out of the crowd and try and get them to guess. But today I am going to provide the answers for you. And so the corn yield gap, so the world record yield of corn was 616 bushels per acre. And that was back in 2019. The US average record yield is 177 bushels, and that was back in 2017. So the yield gap is the record yield minus the average yield, which is 439 bushels. So the world record is 2.5 times the average US yield. So there's a lot of potential here. That 440 bushels, now that 616 is pretty high. And when you do the math on number of kernels per ear per plant, it starts to get, a little bit, how reasonable, right? But why can't we get that US average to 200 bushels or 250 bushels? There's a lot of room for improvement. And it all comes down to how we manage our crops. And so we start with the selection of genetics, right? Your maturity groups when we're thinking corn, right? RM for your area. We just had a lot of talk about BT, right? What trait packages are we going to include? How much below ground versus above ground? Cost is always associated. Maybe you're organic or conventional, right? So these decisions are all individual to the management that you have for your farm. And that's pretty well understood by each individual farmer and their representative dealers, right? But you have to start here. Good solid genetics. The seed you put in the ground is then what you're going to manage and protect. We have to optimize the plant spacing and the planting populations. So like I said, in Illinois, we're pushing the populations a little bit more. I don't know what the average planting population is in New York, but here is what I've got a graph here. And this is the average planting population across the US superimposed with the average grain yields. And so the blue line is planting population because that's a solid number, right? You put it in the ground at a set rate, and then we manage and see how much comes up. Yield, of course, bounces back and forth. The last weather fiasco right here, 2012, right? But what we see is that as we increase yields, it's directly correlated to increasing our plant populations. And in fact, when you do the math, we are increasing at a rate of 400 plants per acre per year. So I have a follow-up question then, right? What happens to the size of each plant's root system as that population is increased? There's three options. It gets smaller, it gets bigger, or it stays the same. I'll let you think on it for a few seconds while I grab a sip of water. And now that we all have the answer in our head, I'll give it to you. It gets smaller. And how do we know this? Well, as Mike mentioned, Dr. Bilo has grad students that love to do a lot of labor-intensive work. And so we have a pretty slick root washing setup. So we go out, we dig the roots, we bring them back, we power wash all the soil off, and we got a nice setup here. I think we used 6,000 gallons of water to go through about 3,000 roots last year. And we get these nice bundles. I cannot tell you from personal experience, washing roots is by far a graduate student's favorite task. I mean, just look at the faces of these students. There is nothing they would rather be doing than out washing roots. And all that joy and excitement, though, provides some really, really cool and interesting data. And so what we have here, we go and image those roots once they're clean. Now, this is the root ball. So this is, 85% of the root. We know there's fine roots that go out, but this is the bulk area of the plant root system that's going to supply, feed, support that plant. So at 30,000 plants per acre, we have a nice big root system. And as you increase in population, that root system gets smaller. And these would be from 30-inch rows, the same hybrid. What we find, and we've done multiple studies over the last couple of years, you can weigh them as well and not just get the visual, but the actual biomass here. What we find is that for every 1,000 plants you increase, you lose 2.5% of your root mass per plant. And if you look at that 400 plants per acre per year, well, that's 1%. So every year we are losing 1% of our root system because we're pushing plant populations. And the reason I want to stress this is because as we push towards that, these smaller root systems are more susceptible to stress. If you have a feeding event, there's less roots, they're going to go through it quicker. So we have to protect the roots. Think about, through our biological controls with nematodes like we just talked, or we're going to look as I get into the biological component, maybe biologicals can help minimize stress here, right? From a basic management mechanical perspective, what if we narrowed the rows? So 36,000 plants in a 30-inch row spacing, those plants are 5.8 inches apart. Now, 36,000 is closer to Illinois populations. I mentioned the US average is 32,000, but the trajectory is going forward. So we need to know what's the future going to look like when we get that US average to 36,000 plants. Well, if we go to a narrow row, in this case, 20-inch rows with the same population, we now get 8.7 inches between each plants, and you gain some of that root system back. I don't have that data today, but when I show you that we lose root mass, when you narrow the row and increase the plant-to-plant spacing, you get some of your root systems back. So from a machinery mechanical perspective, we can start to manage that, but eventually we are going to have to protect our root systems. So standard crop management, right? Right genetics at the right spacings, populations. Look at your traits too. Some genetics love high densities, some prefer small densities. We have to ensure adequate nutrient availability. And we're thinking corn, particularly, it's going to be nitrogen and phosphorus. And so these are some graphs from Dr. Bilo, one of his students a couple years ago. We look at the nitrogen uptake into the corn plant through the season, and then where in the plant that goes. And so you can see, we get into R1 and all of our nitrogen starts to go into the grain here through through grain fill. But what we see for a 230 bushel corn crop, at peak uptake, that crop needs more than 7 pounds of nitrogen per acre per day for 21 straight days. That's the slope here. That's a lot of nitrogen on a daily basis. But if we want to achieve 230 bushel corn, that's what it's going to take. Similarly, when we think about phosphorus, and what really surprises me about phosphorus uptake, you can see here, right when we initiate grain fill, we only have 50 to 60% of our phosphorus uptake. 40 to 50% of phosphorus uptake actually occurs during grain fill. Where is that phosphorus coming from? Through the roots, right? And so everything about protecting and managing our crops is tied together. Managing our roots to make sure we can supply the nutrition that that crop needs all season long. And then, of course, weed control, right? Weeds do not add yield, they take away from yield. And that also comes into disease control. And I know you're gonna have talks on both of these later, either today or tomorrow, because they're important. Like I said, pests don't add yield, they take it away. And so when I talk about biologicals, I have to start and build the base. Because if you don't do these 5 things, if you try something else, you're probably gonna fall short. It's the limiting factor. And so once we've got our basics in place, how else can we manage row crops, right? And that's biologicals. And I put an exclamation point there because I get really excited about it, largely because I'm getting a degree in this area and I'm hoping it works, right? But I do see a lot of potential. So this is my 5th year working with biologicals. And every year I've seen dramatic improvement in how companies and industry are approaching the research, the science that is going into it. And so a lot of that old terminology where, snake oils, right, that we've been hearing about, it is going away because the science is improving. We're better targeting and understanding these, and we're making them work with our management systems. So my personal opinion, these are something to be excited about and look forward to in the next 5-10 years. So how can we use biologicals, right? Well, that's the beauty of it, is there's a lot of versatility if you have the right product, right? Maybe it's a seed treatment. I do advise caution here. I call seed treatment crowded real estate. Just how much products can you coat on that seed and expect them all to work the same 100%? And like I said, you got to have your pests controlled. So I would actually try and avoid seed treatment, maybe put your pesticides on the seed, protect that seedling, and then the biologicals can be applied maybe in furrow with a starter or pop-up fertilizer. Foliar vegetatives, add it to the tank with your post-emergent herbicide, or maybe reproductive when you're putting out that fungicide or insecticide. The beauty of these is you have to make those passes, right? That's part of the standard management. Weed and disease control, well, let's add another product that's the right fit for your system, and you get that free ride of application. So product cost here is, for the most part, all you have to pay when you pair it with other practices. And this is what this can look like, right? So here I have a 1034-0 starter and then a biostimulant that was colored red, and they're going out in 2 different streams in this case. So that way we have 2 tanks. And so always look at compatibility, right? Make sure that the biological will mix with your fertilizer, or if you have like a direct inject or a separate tank, you can stream 2 products together into the furrow. Seed treatment, like I said, it's here. Those are soybeans. I know this is a corn talk, but it's a beautiful picture. Like I said, though, especially, if we're in more, some systems, I know that they're looking at untreated beans and things, maybe there is room for seed treatment. Right here, post-emergent timing for corn. This is interesting because you are going to hit the foliar of the corn, but you're also going to hit a lot of soil too. And some of our biologicals are soil targeted, and some of our biologicals are foliar targeted. So foliar target would be that reproductive stage, right? So R3 for beans, VTR1 for corn, foliar target. So think that in mind as well. What product am I using and how do I need to get it to where it needs to be? We're looking at coatings on dry fertilizers. One thing that's been promoted is dusty humic acid for your urea prills. Maybe it's crop residues. So I do some no-till work where we're looking at biologicals to enhance the residue cycling. I call residue nature's biological, right? There's a lot of good nutrition in that corn stover or soybean stubble. Can we make that available for the next year's crop? So these are the ways that we can use biologicals. And this is where I pause and people think, wow, he's been talking for 10 minutes now, but he's only said biologicals. What exactly are biologicals, right? That's, I think, what most of us are here to learn today. I put them into three big categories. There's plant growth regulators, there's beneficial microbes, and then there's biostimulants. Now, the plant growth regulators, these are your hormone products, things like Ascend, Receptor, Cygen, and those are pretty heavily regulated, being hormone products, but those were kind of the first biologicals in a sense. But what's new and growing are the beneficial microbes and the biostimulants. These are the products that you're going to be getting put on your desk, or somebody's going to come up to the shop and say, hey, I have this new product. It's going to be probably one of these two categories. If I'm going to oversimplify it for you, it's the living versus the dead, or the formerly living. A lot of biostimulants come from organic sources, but after they've died and moved on. Beneficial microbes are still alive, kind of like think about the nematodes, right? Those would be beneficial microbes as a biopesticide. So where do biologicals fit in then, right? Are they kind of like a fertilizer input? Are they like those plant growth regulators that open the door? Or are they their own independent category? That's the real question that the whole legislature is trying to figure out right now. Actually, the 18 Farm Bill was the first time plant biostimulant was brought up in legislature for regulation. And they claim that a plant biostimulant is considered a substance or microorganism, beneficial microbes, right, that you can apply to the seeds, the plants, the rhizosphere, and they're going to stimulate processes related to nutrient uptake, nutrient efficiency, stress tolerance. Remember, I talked about the small roots. Small roots are stressed. Maybe that's why we need our biologicals, protect those stressful crop or even crop quality and yield. So based on this description, sometimes it's nutrients, sometimes it's stress. So are they more like fertilizers? Are they more like plant growth regulators? Or the truth that I like to present, in all honesty, they overlap both. So because they overlap both, there's enough distinction though. They are diverse, standalone. So you're going to have your fertilizer inputs that you have to consider. Make sure you get all your nutrient bases covered. If you're using a plant growth regulator, it's a totally different mechanism, totally different type of product when you need to think about how it works. And then the beneficial microbes, that's where there's a lot of variety, and you can go in and pick one or two that fits your system. So what are biologicals? Because now it's 15 minutes I've been talking and I still haven't told you, right? That's because it's a very, very stressful question. Like I said, I've been going on 5 years, right? Here I am, young, fresh, 2017 grad student. I'm going to go study biologicals. And 4 years later, I don't know if the hair loss is from age or the stress of trying to figure out this whole conundrum of biologicals, right? But the good news is during this pandemic and some quarantine time, I had some time to think and put it together. And here they are. Here are the 7 most common types of biologicals that you're likely to see on the market. Is this all of them? No, by no means. But are these the most predominant ones? Yes, I would state that and claim that. These first 3 are what I would classify as those beneficial microbes. And these next ones are what I would call biostimulants. And we're going to go through these one by one very briefly to really, like I said, back to when I opened up, let's get to the nitty gritty. What is in that product category and how does it work? And then is it the right fit for your farm? We're going to go in order. And so starting with the subcategories, the nitrogen fixing bacteria. What these do is they increase plant available nitrogen. And these bacteria are really cool. And I'm going to use soybean as an example because this is where it kind of all started, right? We know that our legumes and rhizobium bacteria have a relationship. So here's a soybean root with these nodules. And in those nodules are bacteria that take nitrogen out of the air and convert it into ammonia that the plant can then use, right? Unavailable to available, increased plant nitrogen. We've known about this, right? This is not new. And another follow-up question, right? Got to give a little bit of soybean credit here today. Does anyone know how much of a soybean's nitrogen actually comes from the nodules, right? Percentage of total soybean nitrogen needs, right? Well, actually, in the US, it's about half or 50%. So 50% of that nitrogen comes from the bacteria. The other 50% is either fertilized or mineralized from our soils. And soybeans, for the most part, be mineralization. So that's where this whole nitrogen fixing thing started. Bacteria with nodules on soybean. So the next question that I have for you is, how much of corn's nitrogen comes from the nodules, right? I showed you that big uptake graph of how much nitrogen a 230 bushel corn crop needs. Well, how much nitrogen comes from nodules for corn? Trick question, right? None. Corn does not develop nodules. And so is the whole nitrogen fixing bacteria thing for corn out of the question, right? Do we even consider that? Because when we think about sources of nitrogen for corn, there's two predominant ones that we're all familiar with. You have fertilizer, whether it's, think urea, anhydrous, UAN is the first source. And then the second source is soil, like I said, mineralization. And so corn supply, traditional, is fertilizers and soil because they can't pull it out of the air. Know this is a topic everyone's kind of tired of discussing, and we're going to go through it briefly. Fertilizer prices are up, right? It's kind of remarkable what's happened in the last couple months. So a lot of growers are questioning, do I buy, put as much nitrogen as I would, or do I cut those rates back? So then we start asking new questions. Can we supply atmospheric nitrogen to the corn like a soybean crop would? Can we get away from some of that fertilizer requirement and find a new source? Enter, again, these nitrogen fixing bacteria. So I'm going to put three companies up there. Industry is driving this, and that's because they've got a lot of the resources and reach, but they're working with universities to really understand this. So I put these up here. Proven, Pivot Bio, I think everyone's probably seen their logo, heard some advertisement. Their marketing campaign is pretty impressive. Invita is another one from Zodic North America. They have a nitrogen fixing bacteria. And then Terramax Ag's a smaller company, but they've been doing this the longest, actually, out of Minnesota. Each three companies has some sort of nitrogen fixing bacteria for corn in a slight different twist. Pivot Bio has edited theirs so that the microbe is always fixing nitrogen. Invita, that one colonizes inside the plant cells. So it's pulling nitrogen from the air. It's moving through the leaves, and then it's converting it, making it available in the plant. And then Terramax uses natural microbes, but they've concentrated them, kind of like the nematodes earlier, right? The nematodes are natural, but if we can concentrate them and then apply them in a concentrated area, we give them the advantage. So that's the approach here. And what that does is takes nitrogen out of the air, gives it to the corn plant, right? It's another source of nitrogen for the corn crop that we haven't really been able to access in any of our previous history. So I'm going to go through a few data points. Disclaimer right now, all my data comes out of Illinois. So we have very different soils, different organic matter. Our southern parts of the state, 1.5%, 2% organic matter. I worked on a 6% organic matter in Northern Illinois last year. So quite the range. But we have done some studies to give you some idea on how to position these. And so like I said, I wanted to give you how these products work. Takes nitrogen out of the air, gives it to the plant. And so we did a nitrogen rate study, right? How much nitrogen can those products supply? And this is looking at proven. And we did a nitrogen rates from 130 to 180, so 50-pound difference here with incremental jumps to see maybe the replacement value. And so at 130 bushels, we got no response. This is two locations. So I should say, you can see here in the corner, Nashville is 2.6% organic matter, Yorkville was a 4.4. So mineralization potential of these sites, doubled. But we saw very similar trends across these two sites. At 155, pounds an N, and you'll notice the yields are low. We had some weather stresses at these two sites, but we got 3 more bushel. At the 165, it was a net wash again, so we start scratching our heads. But at 180, which is the grower standard in Illinois, we got a 7 bushel response at both sites. So averaged together, we get that 7 bushel response. And this is sort of surprising to us, right? At full rates of nitrogen, we got the best response. And we see this pretty routinely when we're working with this product. It works good when your nitrogen is adequate. The other product that we looked at was Invita, right? So proven is applied in furrow, and it doesn't nodulate, but it lives along the root. And as the root grows, the bacteria grow and live along it. Invita, this is the one that you can put in furrow and it'll colonize in the root cells. You can actually spray it foliar and it'll colonize inside the leaves. But here's a much higher yielding corn crop, a standard management with 160 pounds of nitrogen up front. And when we put this nitrogen fixing bacteria in furrow, we got 11 bushels, and that certainly paid for it because we had the system on the planter, that cost has been covered. So 11 bushels on top of 160 pounds of N. What about enhanced system? I talked about that world record yield, right? What about the growers that are putting everything they can in the kitchen sink, right? So an enhanced management where we had a total of 220 pounds, right? That was a 272 bushel crop, right? Almost 40 bushel plus advantage here from management alone. But when we put that product in furrow, we still got an 8 bushel response. And so the idea of nitrogen replacement is not necessarily the case when we see some of this. And then here's an azospirillum. This is that natural one I talked about. Natural bacteria that we've isolated, concentrated, and then applied in the root zone at higher rates, and a nitrogen rate study. So as we increase our nitrogen rates, we increase our yields. That's here in the left column. Not surprising there, nitrogen gives you higher yield. But when we added the in-furrow nitrogen fixer, lo and behold, once again, at our highest rates of nitrogen, we get our greatest responses to these. And so the reason that we see this, I'll talk the key takeaways to the nitrogen fixtures when we think about putting them in our systems. Biologically fixed nitrogen from an applied biological product does improve yields. I showed you 3 examples, 3 different types of products where we had good responses, but typically at higher rates of nitrogen. So the greatest responses today, I'm not saying that as these products evolve and develop that they'll be able to produce more nitrogen, but you need probably at least 160 pounds of nitrogen per acre starting. You got to give that plant the base. And then these nitrogen fixtures, nitrogen varies greatly across a field, immensely. Within 30 foot, you can have a difference in soil supplied nitrogen. So what these bacteria do is they help balance that out. That's where they're making that yield difference up. Your high spots will always be high, but maybe they're bringing your low spots up and your field average then continues to climb. So that's the perspective we have with these products, is they're not going to carry across the whole field, but they're going to minimize the variability in nitrogen supply. And so they supplement N fertilizer, but they today cannot replace it, and balance management is key. And I go back to this comment here, right? 7 pounds of N per acre per day. Today's bacteria, nitrogen fixing bacteria, cannot supply that much nitrogen. But say your fertilizer is giving you 6 pounds and you want 230 bushel crop. Now the microbes are going to give you that extra pound you need to get that yield bump up to that higher level. So that's just a brief overview on the nitrogen fixing. I focused a lot of time here because I think these are the ones that you're probably hearing the most about, and they're probably going to be having the greatest push as we move forward. What I see down the research pipeline, nitrogen fixing bacteria, there's going to be a lot more options as this research area continues. So what about the phosphorus solubilizing bacteria? They increase the availability of mineral phosphorus. What do I mean by that? Well, phosphorus in our soils, there's a lot of it. There's a lot of phosphorus in our soils, but it's bound to cations like aluminum or calcium, and that is not plant available. So when we add these phosphorus solubilizing microbes, they're specifically designed to attack those compounds, break them apart, and now this phosphorus is available for the plant to use. So it's making mineral phosphorus available. So we did a study, this is from 2019, where we looked at a different type of, it's called Invigorate, phosphorus solubilizing bacteria. We put it either in furrow or what about a wide drop, right? Maybe we want to try an alternative placement. So we got 8 bushel response with the in furrow, which is pretty good for that, especially there we go. We hit that 230 bushel yields, and we got a moderate response with the wide drop. They need to be along the roots, and the wide drop simply won't get the bacteria to the root system like an in furrow will. And so this product had an N-fixing bacteria and a phosphorus solubilizing. Now, a lot of it, yeah, we increased the yields, but maybe start thinking why. did the product actually do what it was claiming to do? And we actually measured the nutrient uptake into the crop, and lo and behold, we did get improved phosphorus and zinc uptake into that corn crop. And you'll notice here, even the Y drop, it was making phosphorus available for uptake. Didn't all translate to yield, but phosphorus solubilizing bacteria, they are making phosphorus available, and it's helping to improve grain yields and nutrient uptake. So we think about water quality, right? This is one way to make sure that, yes, we are getting our phosphorus into the plant. So some of the takeaways with those phosphorus solubilizers. The in-furrow applied gives you the greatest yield compared to that Y drop because you have to optimize the biological placement. Roots take phosphorus, or corn plants take phosphorus up through the root. Therefore, you want phosphorus to be available along the root. Place the product in furrow. Optimizing grain yield with these phosphorus solubilizing microbes, like I said, right there, growing on the roots, and you can increase phosphorus uptake. So in this case, maybe we can reduce our phosphorus fertilizer applications a little bit. I'm not saying you can get rid of it completely. They're not going to make all of your soil phosphorus available. And actually, you don't want that, right? Then you start mining your soil reserves. So it's a balance again. So maybe instead of, if you're applying 60 pounds of P2O5, maybe you put out 50 pounds of P2O5, and this bacteria can help get that other 10 pounds you're looking for. The other beneficial microbe is mycorrhizal fungi. I'm going to go over these briefly because I don't have much data on this myself, but they have been around. Valent has a lot of these products. So they extend the root system. So here's just a generic depiction of a legume type crop or a grass. And you can see the roots are colored in yellow and orange. And that black, that's the hyphae of mycorrhizal. And they're called arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. Those arbuscules are depicted, here in orange. The name of the game with these is they make a bigger root system by growing with the roots, exploring the soil area, and making access to soil supplied nutrition or moisture. So when you think about AMF, it's all about exploring the soil, making sure, if you broadcast your fertilizer, but your rows are 30 inches apart, how do you get to that fertilizer that landed between the rows? Maybe something like an AMF. When I think about AMFs in an application system, seed inoculation is probably going to give you the best bang for your buck because, like I said, they grow with the root. And if you want efficacy, put it where the root will be, right? Inoculate the seedling roots, and then it'll grow into the soil profile. These have had different efficacy. And when I think about AMF, right, it takes time to build that hyphal network. If you have an in-season coulter side dress for nitrogen, or you're doing manual weed cultivation down the rows, if you disrupt the soil area between the rows, you might actually also disrupt the hyphae. And so then you may not get the efficacy. So just things to consider. I know no-till systems have an abundance of AMF because that hyphae system is able to grow and it's not disturbed. So it just keeps building upon itself. And so maybe in that type of a system, you put out there once, give it a few years, and it'll start to develop and build a system there. So that's the 3 beneficial microbes. Now we get into some of our biostimulants. I'm going to start with enzymes. These are the newest category in my experience. These are the newest type of biological to come to market. They also predominantly are phosphatase. Some are carbon related for residue. But they're going to increase the availability of organic phosphorus, right? So there's 2 pools of phosphorus in our soils. The mineral tied to those cations and the organic, right? It's a component of organic matter. What are cell membranes made of? Phospholipid bilayers. Take everybody back to high school biology today, right? And there's phosphorus available in that organic matter, but plants cannot use it. So we add these enzymes, and they come in, and they grab a hold of that complex, and they are very specific at how they do this, and they break it apart, and now this phosphorus is available for the plant. What's cool about enzymes, they're not living. So some people challenge, those phosphorus microbes and those nitrogen microbes, they're doing that because they need the nutrition and the plant gets what's left, right? In some cases, yes, enzymes are not themselves living. It's just a unit. Think of Pac-Man just going through the screen. Every dot it releases is a phosphorus gained, and it just goes into the soil solution. So there's a really cool advantage here if you optimize that into the system. So I have an example where we looked at 3 different products at 3 different sites in Illinois. And so we have Southern Illinois is represented by Nashville. We're around a 2% organic matter. Champaign, where I'm from, Central Illinois, about a 3.5%, 4% organic matter. And then Yorkville, and this year didn't have as high of a yield. That was the year of the derecho, but we have 5% organic matter. And we looked at 3 different companies' versions of enzymes, and they were all phosphatase enzymes. And so what is the yield response? These were all applied in furrow. And you'll see here, I have a wide range, and I'm going to highlight the biggest changes. First off, I'll get the ugly out of the way, right? Why do we lose 26 bushels? I'm still scratching my head around this. I looked at it all different ways, though. This is the final finding. This is legitimate result. One of the things about enzymes, they go after organic matter. So it might have attacked the plant root and exposed it to pathogens. So we're looking into that. You know, you have a high pathogen environment, and you might increase pathogen exposure. And so that might be there. But a different enzyme that attacks a different bond actually had a 9 bushel advantage at this site. And I look at Champaign, right? These 2 were neutral. And I put this enzyme, it was 8 bushels. And in Yorkville, the highest organic matter site, right? I got 14 bushels from putting this enzyme in furrow. So why, you know, this is part of the challenge of biologicals. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's product A and sometimes it's product B. What's going on there? Can we maybe hone in on that? And we're starting to. So here's the phosphorus test. 14 ppm, this is malic in our southern site. 29 in Champaign. At 147, this is a previously manured site. I think a lot of you on this call today are familiar with manured sites. Very high phosphorus level there. And then there's the organic matters that I was talking about. So if enzymes go after organic matter, or they help with phosphorus that might be, you know, in the soils and tied into organic matter, maybe it's those high organic matter sites that you need this, but in low organic matter, if there's nothing for that enzyme to act on, it's going to go to the nearest thing it can. Maybe in this case, it was the plant. So are all phosphatases the same? Are those products the same? So these are the ones that we have. So Brandt ends up zinc. You can get that one. They have 2 enzymes in there. The CHS product never went to market. And then Zypros from Helenon, they call it phospholipase C. So you got a lipase. This one is a phosphatase, right? And this one says, this is looking at the labels, phospholipase C. You know, if you don't really understand enzymes, this still, even to me, sometimes I'm questioning, you know, which phytase, right? Here's the chemistry lesson of the day. This is organic matter at the chemical level, and there is my phosphorus. And there's a phospholipase C, there's a phospholipase D, and there's a phospholipase A and a lipase A1 and A2. Well, that's where I need to cut. That's where I need to make the SNP to make that available. And this product on the label, all right, I can do that math, right? That's where it's making the cut. That's making that phosphorus available. I don't know which one this one is. And it was this one A, C, or D, right? Because if I'm cutting out here, I'm degrading organic matter, but I'm not making any more advantage on the phosphorus over here, right? So there's a lot of variability in these, and it's going to take some push on the industry to get more clarity on which types of enzymes we're looking at. But we have seen that there can be success here. That Yorkville previously manured, I just think, what if one of those is a phytase, right? Phosphorus is, everyone knows, you know, there's a lot of phosphorus in manure, but it's in a phytate form. You have to break phytate apart, right? So if you have the phytase enzyme, well, now maybe we can use all of that manure phosphorus more available in a single year than what we're typically used to. So I have seen phosphatases increase green yields, seen them decrease yields. They're not each the same, and each one has a different target. And so your soil environment very well may determine which enzyme you need. Like I said, that Yorkville, high organic matter, a lot of manure up there, man, enzymes loved it up there. That low organic matter soil down south, we may have gone in the wrong direction because we were acting on the wrong substrate. I see this growing. This is all phosphorus. Think about the carbon world right now. That's just blowing up, right? Residue and organic matter are degraded by enzymes. I think that this is another category you're probably going to need to keep up with because there's going to be a lot of new options out there. I'm going to take a quick sidestep, biological synergies, right? So those phosphorus solubilized microbes, we're going after mineral phosphorus. The enzymes are organic phosphorus. So these aren't competing against each other. So 2 different biologicals, 2 different phosphorus pools. So now maybe we have the ability to supplement more. I think the example I used earlier, right? If you're putting out 60 pounds of P2O5 and you want to reduce to 50, well, maybe if you do both of these, 2 different pools of phosphorus, maybe we can reduce that to 45, which would be a 25% reduction. Now, if you can come out and say, I was able to reduce my phosphorus input by 25%, but maintain yields, now we're getting somewhere in the potential of a biologicals or pairing of biologicals to be beneficial to the farm. Because you don't have to increase yields. Don't forget that, right? You can maintain yields with less input and get higher ROI. That's something that I think too often we say, did it increase yield? And I don't have the math on everything for economics, but don't forget about that different piece of the puzzle. So the other one is humic fulvic acids. These have probably been around the longest in regards to biologicals. After those PGRs came out, humic fulvic acids, they help chelate soil cations, they feed the microbes. Second chemistry lesson of the day, this is what those products look like. All these rings, it's carbon. So it's concentrated carbon. Humic acids, you'll see that on the label. They're bigger compounds. And then fulvic acids, they're the smaller blends, and they have a couple more reactive sites. And so those are functional groups, carboxylic acids. The hydrogens here, they pop off. And then that leaves this negative, and that chelates these cations. Remember those phosphorus solubilizing bacteria? How I said they break apart phosphorus to aluminum binds? This is how they do it. Those microbes secrete organic acids that can then tie up cations, making phosphorus available. What's really cool here, though, if you chelate the zinc and that moves to the root, crop needs zinc, right? So that's why we also saw that increase in zinc. So the categories are starting to tie together here a little bit. And so that's just through chelation. And these are, when people say, sometimes I get, how long do these last in soils? Depends on the parent materials some. But these are pretty stable molecules. That's humic and fulvic acids. As organic matter degrades, this is towards the bottom of that level. So they're pretty resistant. And so they'll be active for a good portion of time in your field system before the microbes tear them apart for that carbon. So you can think of an early season advantage to keeping nutrition available, and then a late season advantage from supplying the microbes and supplementing that system. And so that's where it comes in later. As they eventually start to degrade, you're stimulating root zone through microbial activity. Here's just a list of product examples. Helena has been leading the game here a lot with Hydrohume. The Andersons are around here. I don't know if the Andersons are popular out in New York. They've got some. And then this Sipcam Agro, they're out of Italy, but they do have Sipcam Agro. I think they're based out of North or South Carolina. So here you can see it. This is also where biologicals get tricky. We won't go into today, right? The label says it's chelated zinc. It's chelated with fulvic acid. So this is actually a fulvic acid with some zinc. But you notice that didn't make it to the label, and they can call it a fertilizer. But this is in fact a biological as a fulvic acid. Baccarat here is a concentrated mixture of humic acid and then Humatex. So these are just some examples. I'm not going to go into data today, and I'll explain why. When I think about humic and fulvic acids, they all come in all shapes, sizes, colors, liquids, dries. Depending on which product you use does determine how it's placed into your fit, right? Are you doing a bulk dry as a soil amendment? I've seen some humic acids recommended for 300 pounds to the acre. It's like a fertilizer. Maybe it's a dry fertilizer coating. Like I said, some of these are powders, and you coat them on your urea prills to try and protect the nitrogen from being lost through volatilization. Or you're doing a liquid in furrow, concentrating it, using it as a stimulant, right? If you have specific products of interest or questions on that, we can go down the road, but there's almost too many options in this area. It's very system and product specific. And then the last two biostimulants are the marine extracts and the sugars. I place these two together because they kind of do the same things, just different products. We're applying them to the soil. We're going to stimulate the microbes and the roots. And if we're applying them foliar, it's going to be largely a mitigation of stress. And most often what you'll see a response to is drought. What are marine extracts? It's a complex blend of metabolites, providing versatility in their use. Really, really vague, right? Essentially, what they're doing is they're harvesting seaweed, they're drying it, pressing it, extracting all the juices, and that's what you're applying. And so it's just really concentrated organic plant material and seaweeds. A lot of them come from the Arctic Circle. It's very cold up there. They live in the ocean. It's salt water. If you're near the surface, during the peak of the day, that water gets pretty warm. But then when it goes to night, the water gets really cold. So what seaweed has done, seaweed has adapted to so many stresses. And as the season changes, as the saltiness comes through, the temperature swings, it very quickly produces metabolites and antioxidants to account for that. So when you harvest the seaweed, all those goodies are right there. And then when you apply it to your field as a foliar, right, they can mitigate stress because there's a bunch of different metabolites that are designed for those stresses. And so that will help the crop respond. It's like the crop will build these naturally, but if you apply it, it's like, oh, I have this now, I should make more. It's kind of a kickstart to the whole stress response of the system. And then soil application, there's a lot of carbon in there, kind of like the humic acids, stimulating root and soil microbial activity. I'm going to go into the sugars next. So these are just simple carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, individual units, monosaccharide, think glucose or fructose, disaccharide, there would be sucrose, or chains in polysaccharides. And like I said, direct signals, energy source for microbes in the soil, or maybe we can signal molecules in plants. When I like to think about sugars, Coca-Cola, right? Why do you drink a Coca-Cola? I had a fellow grad student, every single morning would walk in and down a Mountain Dew for the sugar, for the energy, right? We humans love sugar and energy. Plants and microbes love sugar and energy too. It's the exact same concept when you think about that soil application. And so these can be depleted very quickly, very different from the organic acids, but it's like a kickstart jump. It gives you that whole system a higher starting point, and then it maintains and goes from there. So when I think about that, here's an early season corn plant. We applied a sugar in furrow or a marine extract, and we're going to zoom in, and those blue dots, right? Maybe that's our sugar or marine extract. That's the in furrow placement, right? They stimulate the microbes located there in green. And then as this root grows, the microbes then take off. So the sugar got the whole system started more quickly. And those microbes, I talked about a few of them earlier, right? They can make phosphorus and nitrogen available for the plant from the soil or from the atmosphere. And that helps the plant get off to a bigger, happier, healthier start. From a foliar application, this is an early post-emergence. So the photo is probably not the right timing, but the concept is the same. So we apply them foliar, and that sugar sits on the leaf, moves into the plant, and now it becomes a stimulant and starts building processes to mitigate stresses like drought. So direct energy source for microbes or foliar signal plant. These are two of the sources we've worked with, right? So high fructose corn syrup, by the way, if you put high fructose corn syrup in a cornfield, that is called cannibalism. You can use that one, take that one free of charge. And then this one on the left, that's food grade dextrose, is a common term you've heard. I think it looks suspicious. As a grad student, we use weighing scales, and make sure you clean that up, because if somebody walks by and sees this sprinkled around the weighing scale, they might come asking some questions. But these are the types of products that we're looking at. So you can do a dry or you can do a liquid, right? And so we put these in furrow. And of course, if you have an in furrow system, you're going to be looking at a pop-up starter fertilizer. And what we saw, this is the average of 2 years, but we saw, I promise you, the same response trends in both years, almost identical. It was, we had a hailstorm in 2020, so this is just 2019 and 2021. We got 3 bushels to starter, and on a 255 bushel corn crop around a 4% organic matter, that starter had an uphill battle, right? But we still got 3 bushels from it. Interestingly, we lost 3 bushels from the sugar alone. Start scratching your head and like, all right, I'm out, right? But when you pair them together, 7 bushel response. And I've seen this with multiple sugar sources in multiple seasons. Sugar plus starter is always synergistic than starter alone, and sugars alone tend to be backwards. So we start scratching our head and going, why? Well, when you apply with fertilizer, think APP has some nitrogen phosphorus. This system is making that nutrition available for the plant. But if you have no fertilizer and you're stimulating the microbes, well, they're going to steal the soil nutrition and use it for themselves, right? And that's why we tend to go backwards. So it's a synergy effect. Supply enough nutrition for the microbes and the plant, and then it's a whole happy system working together. And so that's why we see these responses. So what about that foliar? Well, we did look at foliar, and we often get questions on rates, right? So again, these are 2 different years. The 4-pound rate, we did it in 19 and 21, but the 8-pound rate, we just said, well, how high can you go? Beautiful response. This is cheap. I think it's about $2 to $3 an acre was the product cost for this. You got 7 bushel return. That's pretty good. But in 21, we actually trended a little negative. So here's what we saw in 2019. When I was walking plots here towards the end of grain fill, right? Starting to dry down, and the photos never do it justice, but we saw a stay green effect, mitigated stress. We helped that plant get through some drought stress, maintain grain fill. But in 2021, while the yields here are lower, I can tell you we had a hard stop in like August. Like the crop just died early. The whole state, and I think a lot of states, the I states, had this problem. Just got really, really hot towards the end of grain fill, and it just stopped filling kernels. So the yield level was lower, but water precipitation throughout the year was great. It was uniform, so we never had stress until the very end. And at that point, the plant just called it quits. This year, we had stress in the middle, and so that's where it came through. And that comes to the Goldilocks. And this is kind of applicable to some of the other marine extracts too, right? Too little, it's not right. Too much, no, that porridge is too hot, right? We want it to be just right. And so the key takeaways to sugars, when I think about our data and our research, it's a next step management, right? Do not think that sugar will replace starter pop-up fertilizer. No, you still need that pop-up fertilizer. Sugar makes it better. We saw that in-furrow is the best when applied with that starter. And foliar has a benefit, but it's seasonal, right? So if you're not experiencing a drought, don't add it to the tank. Just do your herbicide. Don't touch the crop. It's happy. If it's starting to get stressful conditions and you have that decision, all right, this is when I need to add it. So this is the whole kind of concept and point of today's talk. Let's go through the different categories one by one. What are they really at the skeletal structure level? How do they work? And then now we have to think about my management system. How do I manage my crop, and where do I might fit the right biological? So the category summaries that we have, they can be effective at increasing grain yields. I have seen this, and as I said, every year we're getting better and better at consistent responses. Efficacy, though, does depend upon the type of product utilized, right? Am I using the N fixers or the sugars or the organic acids? So if you really want to optimize a biological, know the product you're working with. Don't let somebody come to the farm and say, hey, add this to the tank. Okay, right? No, ask, well, what is it? Well, and then if they give you some marketing lines, say, no, let me look at the label. What is in there? And if it's not specific enough, maybe it's not trustworthy. The good biologicals will have sound science, and they won't be afraid to tell you what it is. And so then you can decide, yep, I can make this work, or like, no, it's not for me. Lots of options, and there's a lot of opportunities, like I said, but each opportunity will be unique to the individual. Each product will interact with that environment. You saw that with the enzymes, huge interaction, right? So just because they're similar in category, they're each unique. Those N fixers, one's edited, one lives in the plants, and one is free living. They're all N fixers, but they all act a little differently. So really, really fully, this is what I stress, know the product you're working with. Challenge that retail rep. Do they really understand their product? And if they don't understand it, steer clear. But if they sound like they really know and understand the science, now it's something worth trying on the farm, and not the whole farm. Maybe 5 acres this year, 10 acres next year, right? It's going to interact. It's biology. How many of you know of first-year success stories with cover crops every single year, right? It's biology. It's going to take some understanding of the interactions. So our perspective, the crop physiology lab, understand what they do and how they work before you try. They are not going to replace good management. That's why I started with standard management practices, because you have to have those set to guarantee the next steps will work. And maybe there's an opportunity beyond grain yields. I mentioned this, right? If yields are the same, but inputs were lowered, you're increasing your ROI. Ultimately, know what you're starting with. Why do you want a biological on your farm? And then get a goal on how you're going to make it work. And that's all I've got. Special thanks for talking. I know we're a few minutes over here, but I'll stop sharing and we can get a few questions or my email contact information.
No, that was excellent, Connor. Really good review. I learned a lot. There's a lot of those names that maybe they're just not out here in this region in the Northeast, but there's plenty of products that I haven't even heard of before. Again, maybe they're not being sold or pushed out in this region. So there definitely was a lot more out there than I expected to see. I don't see any questions in the Q&A box. We'll give you a minute here if someone has something.
Yeah, and one question I get, Connor, you've been working with these, which product are you going to apply, right? I can tell you from my personal experience right now, from a cost perspective and an efficacy, the sugars right now, to me, if you're going to try that, that's the first step. I'm really excited about the nitrogen fixers. Keep an eye on that one. We're definitely going to see a lot more research in that area and really understand, why they work, sometimes why they don't. So that's the one I'm excited about. But today, I would take a sugar today, no problem.
Okay, there's a couple quick questions here. So Tim said Dairy One is a resource for Envita.
Yep.
And
Envita,
then,
we've had pretty good success with as well.
Okay, and then Daniel has, do you have any idea, do you have any data on the effect of till versus no-till on the root ball studies in the beginning?
Great question. No, I don't have data. I would presume that the response trends are similar, but the magnitude, that what I say, a 2.5% decrease for every 1,000 plants, that might change. But I would expect the same trends.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't see any more. And just, that this was, again, an excellent review of what's going on there. I'm sure we're going to see more of this in the future. And it sounds like if you want to stay in this line of biologicals, Connor, you're going to have a job pretty easy when you come out.
Yeah,
a lot of questions, a lot of research needs to be done.
Yep. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to like I said, wade through the marketing, get to the nitty gritty, and do what we can to make sure that farmers are successful.
Yeah. All right, buddy. Well, we're going to continue on. And again, I appreciate spending time with us from Illinois, and let's stay in touch.
Sounds good. And I'll comment to the questions as we continue.
That'd be great. Thank you very much. All right. Okay, so we're going to move to the last part of our presentation here. Gary Bergstrom is our resident field crop pathologist. And Gary's got some interesting news in regards to diseases. The new one that's been found here finally in New York. We've been talking about it for a couple of years, but it is now currently here. So now we need to listen and we need to watch. So Gary's going to talk about some of the tar spot and probably get into some of the vomitoxin issues that we're having again in corn. So Gary, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thanks a lot, Mike. I assume you can hear me fine.
Yep, I see your slides and hear you fine.
All right, fantastic. So yeah, the main event is to to hit on the main points with this new disease that you have heard me talking about for a few years, but we now have it here, tar spot. And just to outline, I'm going to mainly talk about that, but I also want to touch very briefly on corn mold and mycotoxin situation this year. Some updates on availability of New York registered corn fungicides. And then time permitting, I'd like to say something about another new disease we found in central regions of New York this year, bacterial leaf streak. So let's get on with it. So it's very interesting. We run into ear mold problems, nearly every year in some location on corn. But there was some really hot development of ear molds with the extreme weather patterns that we had this year. It's not uniform by any means, but particularly in some locations in Finger Lakes and the southern tier counties, we saw rather intense development of gibberella ear rot, this pink ear rot that you see on the right-hand side, something we have endemic to New York State, but starting to get significant feedback from some of the feed mills in the state and also our corn ethanol plant. And we're seeing levels of Fusarium mycotoxins, principally deoxynivalenol or DON or vomitoxin, that really are at levels we haven't seen since 2018. Again, there's clean corn coming in as well, but Mike, this is such a big topic. It would be a half an hour on its own. But I didn't want us to talk about corn pathology without mentioning that there is a very significant problem for a number of our growers with discounted or rejected grain in various outlets. So it's something that we need to really continue to pay attention to in the growing seasons ahead. So let me go on to some of the new changes to the Cornell Field Crops Guide to try to stay on top of products that are getting New York labels. And for the first time in this edition, in our corn fungicide table, we have a rather new approach to fungicides on corn. And this is soil applied fungicides, the two Xyway formulations, the 3D and the liquid fertilizer ready. These can be applied on the soil surface or below the surface at the time of planting. These are in the triazole group that we're well familiar with, but flutriafol is particularly mobile in the plant, and application at this early time, the material gets translocated throughout the plant, but particularly into the upper leaves of the plant. And we've seen some pretty amazing control, season-long control in some cases of gray leaf spot and northern leaf blight. There have been some incidences with stand problems, emergence problems, and particularly for early planted corn in a no-till situation. What we've learned is that the flutriafol needs to be separated from the seed. There should not be direct contact there. And some of the 2x2 kind of applications or things that separate by several inches from the seed are important. Going forward, probably beyond 2022, they probably will be backing off of the in-furrow recommendation for application. So I can put something in the chat box, but people wanting more information can approach directly Gail Drake or Chris Leon from FMC. Also, two new multi-component fungicide products in the foliar arena are Veltima and Revitec, both from BASF this year. And I'll be talking a little bit more about foliar fungicides a little later. So the big news is that we've been anticipating tar spot as it's kind of exploded in the Midwestern states over the last few years. At the very end of the growing season, it was found in two well-separated fields in Erie County and was really noticed at the time that the combines were ready to roll. And we'll talk quite a bit about these characteristic fungal bodies, these stromata, that you see in this picture here. And that's really the telltale of this disease. And we got samples from those fields in our lab. We were able to see under the microscope the characteristic spores of the Phylacra matus fungus. And we also isolated DNA and found the DNA sequence to be identical to occurrences of this fungus in the Midwest. So what I'm going to share now is, and some of you may have seen these slides in other forms, but something put together by my colleagues in the Midwestern states in Ontario, particularly Martin Shilvers at Michigan State, Darcy Talenko at Purdue, and Albert Tenuta in Ontario. And they've put together a very helpful slide set that they've generously shared through the Crop Protection Network with their colleagues. And there have been a lot of contributions to this work. And I've had the privilege for many years of serving on the Corn Disease Working Group, and now there's a subgroup working specifically on research on tar spot. So a lot of different universities involved in this, and private sector as well. So first of all, let's take a look at this disease. You can see again these blighted leaves, and what really comes across is these black shiny fungal bodies called stromata. And one thing that's rather remarkable about this disease, its tendency in the Midwest has been to occur fairly late in the season during the grain development period. And you can see on the left-hand slide there, you can see from the browned areas of this field in a matter of 2 weeks, going from that to basically the foliage destroyed on the right-hand side. The very first stromata were observed in this field in Michigan on the 8th of July. So like many of our diseases, it tends to develop and progress with generations of the fungus splashing up from the lower leaves to the upper leaves. But it can also develop rather dramatically at the end of the season without seeing much in the lower canopy. So again, here's a close-up view of these stromata fungal bodies, and they can vary in size. And sometimes we see on the far right associated with them what we call a fisheye lesion, this kind of lens-shaped discoloration surrounding the stromata. We do not always see that, but that's another telltale of the disease. Okay, one thing that I've become accustomed to myself is how to distinguish this from some lookalikes. And one thing that looks very, very similar is frass of insects. And the difference is that that can be washed away or scraped away from the leaves. The tar spot bodies cannot. And it can also be confused with the second stage, the black rust stage of common leaf rust. And if you're accustomed to seeing this, it actually looks a bit different. Those have kind of a burst through appearance. So once you've seen it, I think you'll remember it. So tar spot is a new disease in the United States, but it's not a new disease in the world. Phyllochera matus has been causing problems for the better part of the previous century in particularly mountainous areas of Central and South America and into Mexico. And you might think of this as a tropical or subtropical disease, and it has been, but it's been in the cooler mountainous areas of those parts of the world. And this is a great photo, I think, of showing the cross section of one of those stromata going from the upper leaf surface all the way to the lower leaf surface. And you can see the spore bearing structures within that stromata. And you can see these multi-spored asci sacs that contain these fungi that are extruded through the surface. There's actually 2 spore forms that are formed here. One of which is forcibly discharged and can move around in the air. So the basic life cycle of this, at this point, we don't know of any other host besides corn. And although there are other Phyllochera fungi on other grasses and hosts, but this one seems to be specific to corn. Under moist, warm conditions, it takes about 2 to 3 weeks to complete the fungal life cycle from initial infection to produce another generation of spores. It survives in the infected crop debris. We'll talk a little bit later, though, that once it's in the debris in a region, it gets into the air and can be transported some distance in the air. So it's not just a matter of the field where you have debris, are you having risk? So a number of years ago, there was some modeling done based on knowledge from Central America that the conditions favoring tar spot would include regions of North America such as our own. And this is based on it's favored by moderate temperatures, we've learned in the last year, especially, that it's quite tolerant of warmer temperatures as well. Even up into the higher 80s and 90 degrees. It prefers relative humidities greater than 75%. And the critical thing is that it really would like 7 hours or more of leaf wetness, particularly through the night period. So fog and rain, humidity are very favorable. And hence the epidemic that we saw this last year. Just to drive home the point of how this is associated with high moisture, this is a picture of a center pivot cornfield. And this entire cornfield in Michigan was sprayed at silking, our one stage, with application of headline AMP. But you'll notice in the corner, not directly irrigated, how much less disease than there is under the pivot irrigation. So this really thrives under moisture, whether that be artificially supplied or rain fed. And when we look at leaf net wetness as a driving factor, you can see our own state this last growing season and good parts of Michigan, Wisconsin, and other places that experienced the disease this year. So here is the current map of at the end of the 2021 growing season. You can see that light beige color proceeding into New York State and Erie County. But if you look at the expansion from 2020, from the little darker beige tones, for instance, in one county in Pennsylvania, down in southeastern Pennsylvania, and in the lower southwestern part of Ontario, how it kind of exploded out of those areas into 2021. So we see this expansion continuing, especially in years where we have very conducive moist conditions. So there's a lot of work right now going on in companies and in universities and even in federal labs looking at resistance in corn hybrids and inbreds and comparative susceptibility and resistance. And there's no truly highly resistant varieties been identified to date, but there are dramatic differences in levels of moderate resistance to high susceptibility. And there's just a lot more work that needs to go on. And hopefully through some of the major seed companies, you'll start to see listings of reactions in nursery situations under high pressure. And especially when you look at the effects on yield, particularly there's some, since these things have tended to be really blown up in the later part of the growing season in the Midwest, pretty heavy impacts on some of the full season corn varieties, but also notable yield impacts in the more moderate maturity groups. So there's a lot of work going on by my colleagues in the Midwestern states, especially in looking at foliar applied fungicides, and some real good information emerging there. If you look in this graph, and this is a study in Indiana in 2020. If you look at that solid red line at the late vegetative stage, this was the first stomata of the fungus detected in this field, but it's really not forming much severity of these stromata until we get into the early reproductive stages. And if you follow the top line, this is the development of the epidemic in the non-treated control, as compared to those that were treated at R1, R2 stage with a single spray of a number of fungicides. You can see how a number of these single applications have at least delayed the epidemic development. I think this is a very helpful slide because this is 2 years of data over the 4 states, so 8 different environments, a compilation here of a lot of these foliar fungicides. And you'll see even the moderately effective materials like Tilt, as you see there, does a pretty decent job compared to non-treated. But we're starting to get enough comparisons now that you see a lot of these materials with an E on them that are pretty highly effective as a foliar spray, well timed. And if you look at two different ways of looking at this, the graph on the left-hand side shows the reduction in stromata severity. There's been a trend that single mode of action does pretty well, but two mode of action and three mode of action mixed product fungicides appear to do even better. On the right side of the graph here, you see the effect on yield and a similar trend there, where you see the multiple modes of action fungicide products having the greatest effect. So an area of much needed additional research is using moderately resistant hybrids together with foliar fungicides. And you can see here, if you look at disease severity in terms of the stromata on your left, you see in a susceptible variety the biggest impact of a fungicide, in this case, Trivapro, and less dramatic impact with a moderately resistant host, but there needs to be a lot more work done on these interactions. And here, similar trends in terms of yield. The benefit of the fungicide is most pronounced when applied to a fully susceptible variety. So the question of what's the best timing to apply these foliar fungicides, and again, this is the average of 6 locations in the Midwest, and you'll see compared to on the far left, the non-treated control, applications in the vegetative stages, and then from tassel emergence through the R2, the brown silk stage, and even some dual application. It's really in the tassel visible to brown silk stage that's got the most consistent response in terms of lowering disease and benefiting yield. So we've participated in the corn disease working group, puts together a rating guide for efficacy of fungicides each year. And for the first time last year, we've included tar spot in this list. And there are a number of materials that look pretty darn good now against tar spot applied foliarly. And of course, as you know, there's a subset of those materials that are labeled in New York State, and this changes all the time. And I try to keep that updated. But as you can see, as far as New York labels, we have a number of really excellent materials that are rated good to very good for control of tar spot. So our arsenal is full. We have some good tools to deal with this in the period before we may have identified the best hybrids to fight this epidemic. Another thing I'd like to mention, my colleagues at the University of Wisconsin, you may be acquainted with their Sporecaster, a cell phone app. Some of you have used to predict white mold severity in soybean. They now have a new variant, Tar Spotter, that does an excellent job feeding in data for a particular cornfield and looking at the risk of tar spot infection. Obviously, we don't have the levels of inoculum at this point in New York State, but as we find more instances of tar spot and we have a general higher level in our regional atmosphere, I think we'll find this technique very useful. So what else is the community of plant pathologists looking at? There's a lot of work on screening hybrids and inbreds right now. Spore trapping, I think, is very interesting. We know this fungus, the spores blow around in air. We don't know if that's long distance or maybe more locally to adjacent fields, but clearly the observations of tillage and crop rotation we are seeing within season epidemics, even in clean plowed first year cornfields in the Midwest. Also some good work going on identifying genomics of the fungus and better understanding its biology. So what can a grower or a consultant do at this point where, you know, we just have some initial observation? The key thing is really to identify where the range of this pathogen is, to be scouting fields. I suspect it's much more widespread than what we're seeing right now. One thing to observe is that even if people are out wandering in cornfields looking at debris, you can still see those characteristic stromata even in completely dead corn leaves. I think that growers need to be having a conversation with their seed sales people about resistance, in particularly comparing varieties that do well in our area in terms of yield. Are there differences in the resistance level in some of those? Going forward, I'm sure that some people will want to be looking at fungicide options, and I'd encourage folks to leave check strips there so we can all learn about the impact of some of these fungicides. And don't forget about other diseases. We certainly are endemic diseases like northern leaf blight and gray leaf spot are not to be ignored. So I'd like to fairly briefly mention another new for New York disease that we're finding in portions of New York this last year. This is a bacterial, not a fungal disease. And we confirmed this in 5 counties, more kind of in a central vertical slice through New York this last year. And I think at its early stages, it could be confused with things like gray leaf spot and northern corn leaf spot. You see these linear lesions between the leaf veins, and I'll show you some close-ups of that in a minute. But it is not like the tar spot. It is not new in the world. It's been observed in other parts of the world, particularly South America, for a number of years. But much more recently, it was found under center pivot irrigation, very moist conditions in places like Nebraska. And you can see that list on the United States. It's in the last several years spread into a number of Midwestern Great Plains and even some areas in the South. Our finding of this disease in New York this past year really extends it the furthest east in the US, and also it was found in several places in Ontario for the first time this last year. We diagnosed the disease symptoms by seeing these long, narrow lesions. And if you hold it up to like sunlight or backlight, artificial light, you'll see these very bright yellow halos. The really characteristic thing is to cut through one of those lesions into a droplet of water, and you see this bacterial streaming coming out. And we see this with some other bacterial pathogens, but I think it's rather exaggerated in this bacterial disease. So this is where we've been able to diagnose the disease in New York State in these 5 counties in the last year. And we've done that by seeing the typical symptoms, confirming the bacterial streaming, and we've also made a molecular diagnosis of the causal bacterium. This is also a pathogen that's going to survive from year to year, primarily in the corn debris. There's a possibility that this may be harbored in some other grass weeds, but primarily we're looking at corn debris here. And I would expect to find it particularly in excessively high rainfall seasons like we've just experienced. The jury's still out as far as this having any major impact on corn yield, but certainly in some of those very moist situations like under center pivots, it could have some yield effects. But this is not a disease with the high impact that I consider, such as the tar spot, but it's something we want to keep an eye on. So this is a good point to move over to your questions. And Mike, I'll stop my slides there.
All right, thank you, Gary. There are a couple questions. In here, can you tank mix fungicide with starter for 1 2x2 application?
This is with the Xyway.
Must be the Xyway, yes.
Yeah, I'm going to, yes, I think so, but I'm going to defer to our experts from FMC on that. And I can put in the chat the contacts for Gail Drake or Chris Leon with FMC. And I'd rather you get the very specific recommendation there.
Yeah. Second one, is tar spot a problem in first year corn or corn on corn? And how far can it travel in 1 year?
Yeah, those are great questions, and they're only partially answered. And I did mention that experiences in places like Michigan and Indiana is they can show up to epidemic proportion in a first year clean plowed cornfield. So, but those are in counties, areas where there's been a lot of infected debris. In early findings in New York State, I would expect before that regional inoculum builds up, the places to look would be, kind of valley situations, the kind of places we see the most intense gray leaf spot right now, looking at continuous corn with a lot of debris. Those are the situations I'd expect to find it first. But once that inoculum gets established here, I think it's going to be more general and not confined to multiple years of corn under no-till. As far as how far the spores move, that's why there's a lot of work going on now with these spore samplers. There's no definitive answer yet, but I think we're moving toward ones.
Okay. Is there any data on tar spots' impact on silage yields and quality?
There's some work going on in Wisconsin right now on that. Like many of the foliar pathogens, sometimes there's even a greater impact on silage yield than on grain yield. So there's not a big data set to look at there, but my suspicions are that yes, it will have a decided effect on yield. On quality, I'm not so sure. But just think of it as another stress on the corn plant. And we know that things like stalk rot and ear molds always tend to be aggravated when we have a foliar stress on the plant. So I think it's almost a given that we'll see impact on silage yield, possibly on quality.
Okay. Well, it's something we need to continue to watch out for. I know Ag and Markets now will be, putting out some of us throughout the summer scouting for this across the state and from east to west. So it's something that now will be on Ag and Markets radar.
And I would invite anybody to, if you think you see anything that looks like it, contact Mike. I'll also be accepting samples in my lab, but preferably coming through Mike. So yeah, keep your eyes open for sure.
All right, Gary, excellent. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
All right, everybody. So that's it for today. Fantastic first day.